I love taking a waste product and turning it into something useful. If you've been following along with the channel, you'll see that I've been making lots of mozzarella, which means that I have all of this whey left over. Usually this is just thrown out, or maybe fed to animals or used in some kinds of baking. But there's another delicious cheese that you can make from the leftover whey, called ricotta. Ricotta is an Italian word and translates roughly as recooked. Boiling milk and splitting it with an acid probably dates back many thousands of years, but the origins of whey cheeses coincides with the discovery of rennet around the first millennium BC. Rennet coagulates the casein proteins in milk at much lower temperatures, leaving the lactoglobulin proteins still suspended in the whey. Simply boiling and straining the whey, sometimes with the addition of additional milk and an acid, allowed cheesemakers to access these secondary proteins that were left over. As a quick aside, let's not get caught up in names. According to the internet, true ricotta can only be made from whey. If you add milk to the whey, you're making ricottone. If you make it directly from whole milk, you're either making whole milk ricotta or ricottone, depending upon where you are in the world. Honestly, it's all a bit much. The way I see it, if you've gone to the trouble to make not one but two cheeses, you've earned the right to call it whatever you want. I mean, I think Shakespeare cleared all this up with his famous rose hundreds of years ago, right? So that's good enough for me. So we've established that we're going to make ricotta, and all we need to do is just boil it and strain it and we'll be good to go, right? Not so fast, young Padawan. It turns out that not all wheys are created equal. The type of whey that is left over from a traditional starter-based cheese is called sweet whey, while the whey that is left over from an acid-set cheese, which is what we have, is called sour whey. And according to the authority on these things, the internet, what else, you can't make ricotta from sour whey. The theory is that you need both heat and a particular pH level in order to get the proteins to bond with each other and coagulate into curds. These protein molecules are wound as tightly as new employees at the company Christmas party. When you start to apply heat, it's like the bar has opened. The proteins to form, unravel, and loosen up their ties. But free drinks alone are not enough to get these guys to come out of solution. We need some acid to really get this party started. But it has to be the right amount. If you have too much or too little, these charged bonds remain repulsive like Kevin's mustache. But when you find the sweet spot, the molecules overcome their ionic inhibitions and chain together like square dancers at a hootenanny. So our so-called sour whey is too acidic for those proteins to bond with each other because we're below that 5.9 level pH. But I have an idea of a way we can overcome this obstacle, and we can do this with a very simple ingredient that we all have in our pantries at this moment. Baking soda.
Multipass.
As baking soda is very alkaline, my theory is that we can use that to correct the pH levels before we actually try to recook it. And so, I guess it's time for an experiment. Right, well, we've got everything we need to run our experiments. We've got our whey, we've got milk, we've got baking soda, and we have our pH meter for testing the acidity as we go along. So we're going to be running 4 different permutations. We're going to try recooking just the whey on its own. Now the science tells us that it's too acidic for curd formation, but who knows? Let's go ahead and give it a shot and see what happens. Then we're going to try correcting it with some baking soda. Then we're going to try correcting it with some milk. And then finally we're going to do baking soda and milk added to the whey. And then at the end we're going to taste them. And we're also going to weigh our results. So we're going to get some objective and subjective measurements for what we're wanting to know. And I also got some ricotta from the store that we can compare it to. So hopefully our homemade stuff is going to end up tasting a lot better than this. But who knows? And at the end of all that, I'm actually going to show you how to make the ricotta just from milk on its own. Now, whether or not that's true ricotta, who cares? Ultimately, you can make something that's quite delicious directly from the milk, and we're going to do that at the end because that's the most likely situation you're going to find yourself in, unless you happen to end up with a gallon of whey like I have, If so, fantastic. If not, it's easy to make from milk. It's delicious and it's going to be great. So let's get cracking. Hello guys. Here we are, and it's the next day. What the hell happened, you're wondering? Well, life happened. I started to run my test yesterday, and right from the beginning, I noticed I was getting really odd behavior. I noticed that the whey smelled a bit funny. It didn't necessarily smell off, and I don't think whey smells that great from the beginning anyway. Milk kind of grosses me out in a weird way, which is strange considering how much I've been using it recently in videos. But that being the case, I started to run the experiments and things were just going really odd. I just couldn't tell what was going on. And I went and checked my fridge and I noticed it was warmer than I expected. And I had actually made the mozzarella a couple days ago and stored it in there to be ready to go for starting the video yesterday morning. I think my whey had just gone bad. So I had to scrap all of my footage from yesterday and stay up the rest of the night making mozzarella again so that I could have whey to make ricotta again. So here we are. We're going to start over and do it all again, and let's hope this time that the results come out a bit better than they did last time. I actually thought about just leaving all that out, starting over from here and never letting you guys know what had happened. I didn't want to add extra time to the video, but I actually think it's important to show your mistakes and show that it's all a learning process, and this is just part of what goes along. And I was very frustrated, but it's a lovely day again. I love that I get to do this, and this is just how it goes sometimes. So we carry on, and it's lucky that I like problem solving because I've sure had a lot of them. Anyway, let's get to it. I started by establishing my initial pH levels for both the milk and the whey, and I tracked them throughout the experiments. Although, to be honest, the numbers were all over the show, so much so that I don't necessarily know what to make of them. I think heat has quite an effect on pH. So the testing procedures are pretty straightforward. Essentially, we're going to just bring the whey up to the boil. If we have any additives, we're going to add them in at particular stages along the way, but there's not a whole lot to it really. We're at about 60 or 70 degrees now, and you can start to see we're getting a little bit of separation. We're getting some coagulation there. So we're going to turn off the heat at about 90 to 95 degrees. I'm pouring the whey into a bowl so that I can reuse the pot for the next experiment. And then we're going to cover the whey and we're going to let them sit for 20 minutes. I don't know if sitting matters in all situations, but it was part of the procedure, so I did it for all of them. So here we are with a baking soda only one. We're going to whisk it in and bring it up to the boil. Basically going to do the same with the milk. We're going to add it in, stir it around, bring it up to temp. So this may look like an unplanned fifth experiment, and I'll tell you what's happening. So after draining our first one, the whey only version, you can see there's almost nothing left. I believe that's actually casein proteins left over from the mozzarella, which didn't drain out. So instead of wasting that, I decided to go ahead and do like we do with the whole milk version, where we add some acid at 80 degrees, and we'll see how that works. At this point, we're just watching pots boil. Isn't this exciting? Now you'll see here I actually added baking soda twice at this point because again I was getting weird results with the pH levels and I wanted to see if that was going to assist. So now we're ready to add our acid to this version. There we go, that's citric acid 1%. The action's starting to heat up now, we're getting up to temp. Our milk-only version, we're going to see some curds starting to form in there. They're not sticking to the spoon, I noticed, which is interesting. So the milk and baking soda version, you can see it's almost forming a raft on top. That's a great sign. That's kind of what we want to see when we're making ricotta. So I think that one's going to come out well. So they're pretty much all up to temperature now, and we're going to drain them all out and let them have their little 20-minute nap.
So now that they've had their little rest, we're going to drain them. We're going to drain them through muslin, and we're going to hang them. So you can see some curds in there. It looks like we're going to get some action. Again, the same there. I don't know. We're going to have to see what happens. We're definitely going to get action there. You can see those nice curds in the bottom there. So adding the acid at the end has definitely helped that one. And then finally the one that's showing the most promise. So see that raft that's floating on top? That's a great sign of the way that ricotta should actually be captured. It should float on top, or at least some of it should. And then we're also going to drain the rest because there's still some curds in the bottom. Right, so once they're in their little muslin cloths, we're going to hang them up and let them drain. Now some of these would have actually drained for probably up to 12 or 24 hours because any bits of protein that are in there will clog it up and make it drain slowly. It looks like there's going to be a lot of cheese left in those, but honestly most of them are just going to end up being liquid in the end. You can see by the color of the whey some of the results that we're going to get. The clearer it is, or the more yellow it is, I guess really means we're probably got most of the proteins out of there. The ones that are still white aren't looking so good. Now while those are dripping, we're going to make the whole milk version, which is pretty straightforward and essentially just like the other ways. We're going to bring it up to temperature. Then when we reach our target temperature of 80 degrees, we're going to add some citric acid that's just been mixed in with water. That's 1% again. And you're going to see here that we're actually getting some nice splitting. And in this case, you'll see these curds are actually sticking to the spoon. See how they're kind of clinging on there on the sides? That's the casein proteins. They're much stickier than the whey proteins, and they're helping extract all the whey. And then we finish bringing it up to temperature. We put the lid on it, and we give it a little bit of a nap as well. This is how most ricotta that you buy is made. It's actually made from whole milk. They do some different things into it industrially than what I do, so the texture ends up coming out different. But this is essentially, when you buy it in the store, this is how it's made, from whole milk split with an acid.
Okay, time for my favorite part, the taste test. I think we're going to start with the control. This is the store-bought ricotta. The curds seem really, really small, really smooth, kind of grainy. I've noticed that always about ricotta, has some like a grainy kind of floweriness to it. It's okay, but I'm hoping that these will be better. We're going to try the one that I redid. I started initially boiling the whey. Clearly that wasn't going to work, and I didn't want to waste it, and I wanted to test adding acid later, and so that's what we're going to taste now. Very creamy and smooth, quite like the control, the store-bought stuff, but not nearly as acidic. It's definitely sweeter, and it's not as grainy. It's really super, super, super smooth. That's good. Definitely better than the control. Now the baking soda only one, there's really no point tasting it because it's just liquid at this point. We didn't really get anything out of it, just like the whey only that we boiled. So that's quite interesting. Now the milk only one as well too. As you can see, it's quite kind of grainy and hard to, we didn't get any yield out of it, but you can actually see the curds floating in there. So we did get some curd formation, but they're too small to really be able to be filtered out and to be used. But I'm going to taste the whey in the curd anyway, just to see what it's like. So here we go. It's quite sweet. It basically kind of tastes like the watered down milk a little bit. Just some potential there, but you're not getting enough curd formation. Finally, we're going to test the one which seemed to work out best. This is the one where we added milk and we added baking soda both. We're going to taste the stuff that we scooped off First, that's probably the truest ricotta of all the ones that we've made. Let's try this. Wow, it's quite fluffy, as you can see there. The curds are almost more separate and a little more kind of bouncy. You can hear in the sound too, it actually sounds different than the other ones. On your tongue you can feel the individual curds, but it's still super smooth, really sweet. That's far and away the best one. When I was researching and people were saying when you try a true ricotta versus the store-bought stuff, you'll see the difference. Night and day difference. Now let's also taste the stuff that we drained at the end as well too, because there was a lot of cheese in there we didn't want to waste. Very, very smooth. Also not quite as sweet, which would kind of track because I believe the curds that fall to the bottom are due to a more acidic environment. Not as good as the curds we skimmed off the top. Definitely the best one outside of that. So, conclusions time. What to say about this one? Well, it's been a bit of an interesting journey. Speaking of, my tripod just fell over and broke, so the angle's a little bit weird here. I apologize. This has been quite an interesting video to film. But our question was, can we make ricotta from sour whey? And I think we've answered the question that you absolutely can. It's definitely not straightforward. It's been twisty and turny, but we did get there in the end. So here's what I'll say about it. If you happen to have whey left over, add 1% of baking soda to it, bring it up to temperature, add 1% of acid at 80 degrees, bring it all the way up to 95 or nearly boiling, and put a lid on it, and you are going to get some cheese out of that, and it's actually quite good. If you have milk to add in there too, add 15% milk, and that's going to make it even better. Obviously you're going to get more yield, and then of course the way that most people are likely to do it is just to make it from whole milk, and that's the easiest, and that's going to make a great result too. Well, now that we have all this delicious ricotta, what are we going to make with it? Well, pizza, obviously.
We'll start by spreading out our dough. This is my Goldilocks of pizza dough. You can find a link for this in the description if you want to make it yourself. I'm eventually going to do a video comparing all the different types of rolling or stretching out a pizza dough. I think that'll be pretty interesting. And I also need to show that in detail. I've kind of blown past it in my past few videos. So that looks pretty good. Now we're going to start with the toppings. We'll do the sauce first. There's no recipe for this. This is basically just sauce blended with some olive oil and some oregano. Some salt and pepper as well. Get that all spread out nicely. Go right to the edges. That's how I like it. This is the mozzarella that we made to get the way to make the ricotta. There's also a recipe for this in the description if you want to find the video for that. And look at our delicious ricotta. Isn't it amazing? Honestly, guys, you have to try homemade ricotta. It's even better than homemade mozzarella compared to bought mozzarella. These are fennel seeds. There's already some fennel in the sausage, but I like fennel a lot, so I'm going to add a few extra. And this is classic kind of Italian sausage. Fennel, garlic, some black pepper. It's really good. And into the oven we go. You'll notice that the ricotta doesn't melt in the same way as the mozzarella. Get some nice textural contrast with that. I really like it. And then this is fennel fronds put on top. So we've tripled down on the fennel.
Cheers. Oh my God. I'm telling you, it's 100% worth making your own mozzarella, so you can make your own ricotta, so you can make your own Italian sausage and ricotta pizza. Outstanding.